Welcome everybody. My name is Rande Howell with Trader's State of Mind, and we're going to be exploring the interface between psychology itself and how your performance in trading happens. But first, what I'd like to do is I would like to thank Vicki and Maud of FX Street because I have basically discovered over time that there are certain groups of people who really have a long-term interest in their clients' health. And this is one of those companies. There's rare companies that have that. So, one, I applaud them and I thank them for the opportunity of working with them. They're a great organization. So, let's look at this. How do you go about building a mind for peak performance trading? And have you noticed now that the very kind of thinking that you brought into trading is not the thinking that is producing success in trading? They're very different. We're going to be exploring that. And then how do you overcome fear and replace it with discipline, patience, courage, and partiality? The very emotional states that produce a state of mind that allow for peak performance trading. Then, another question that I ask us to really be dwelling in, and this is a biggie, how do you build a mind to take advantage of uncertainty? It's really a tough one. Your mind, your brain was not built for uncertainty, and yet here we are in trading where you are working with uncertainty, you are working with ambiguity. And there's a problem there that we're going to be looking at very deeply as we go on. So, now, let's look at this. First of all, by the way, when you have questions, type them in, and what happens, often I'll be able to get to the question directly as you ask it. If it doesn't fit in the context I'm talking about, I'll hold it till the end. But when you come to a question, bring it in. Comments are welcome too. So the first thing is, let's take a look at this. What produces successful trading? Now, most people when they get into trading, what happens is they think, hey, I'm pretty smart. I can learn this skill. You know, I've done pretty well. You know, I can just tough it out. I've got a good mind. And, you know, this is a skill set that I can learn. And they spend a lot of time looking at their platform, their trading system, their brokers. They start doing that, and they really get it chiseled down. Then they find a methodology that really gives them the edge, gives them the risk management that they're seeking. And then they discover 2 to 3 years down the line or more that these two elements in and by themselves are not producing successful trading. And it begins to wake up to them that no amount of tweaking a system, refining everything, looking for the edge, the Holy Grail out there is ever going to work. They discover that the problem is within them. It is within the way they are organized and interact with uncertainty. Whew. So ultimately, the components of successful trading are your trading system, your methodology, and your trader psychology. These act together. They're not separate. The truth is, your trading psychology is the driver of the machine of your system and your methodology. Depending on the state of mind of that driver, that produces the difference. Two different traders. As a matter of fact, this actually happened quite recently. I have two clients who trade side by side. One just refuses to acknowledge that his trader psychology needs help. The other one says, man, I want to tell you something. I really need to get this down because I'm blowing myself up. One person begins to be able to develop a probability mindset. The other stays into a certainty mindset. Both of them are viewing the same charts. They're viewing the same everything. Yet one's performance, the one that's checked into probability mindset, has become profitable. The other is still struggling. Same person, different observer. So that's trading psychology, and that's what we're now going to look at. What does it actually take? What does it actually take? The first thing is actually we have to come out of a kind of a self-denial, kind of a self-delusion, that we really do not want to believe that the problem is us. What we want to do is we want to say, you know, I can find more discipline out there. I can find more impartiality out there. I'll find a mechanical system. You know, I'll take all the emotion out of it. And what you discover is you bleed slowly. suddenly you come to the idea is what mindset am I actually bringing to my trading? This is when you discovered that the vast majority of trading is in your head. It's not out there. It's inside you. And this is the piece that needs to be worked with. So, here's the key. From here on out, what we're going to be looking at in this presentation is how do you develop a mindset for peak performance trading? This is a powerful question. And first stop, let's look at this. We try to deny emotion. Often in trading, what you're taught is, well, what you do to be a really good trader, you just leave your emotions at the door and you become emotionless. And you trade from there. But there's only one problem with this particular scenario, is emotions are biological, and that if you're not in an emotion, you're dead. And I'm not hoping that for anybody, okay? The bottom line is that we are emotional beings. Cognition is part of that emotion. But we are emotional beings first. So the key is emotion is always going to influence thinking. Emotion can hijack thinking, and emotions are not optional. So the key is the very first element that you really have to get to is that managing the emotional state that you're in is the key to developing the state of mind for trading. Without it, it's not going to happen. And for a lot of guys in particular, they go, oh my God, what do you mean I'm going to have to deal with emotions? Yes, you are. You're going to have to manage, in particularly, the linkage between uncertainty and fear. And we're going to be talking about that. The truth is, what you will discover in trading, as opposed to many other domains of endeavor, is that trading exposes your most basic elemental self, the basic fears that you have about life that you have ignored or avoided with all your passion up until trading. Then, when you get into trading, the problem is you don't have to worry about avoiding fear anymore, because the psychological demons behind the fear are now stalking you. Ask anybody who has had a frozen finger trying to pull the trigger. Ask anybody who goes into absolute hysteria while in the trade, getting out early, or just, hitting that microtrend, just staying with losers, pulling out early, all that stuff. Emotions there. And these are the two most primary elements that people have problems in trading, is at the moment of entry point where you're actually committing risk. You're actually entering uncertainty. Instead of playing a mind game, you are entering uncertainty, or actually in the trade where you really truly have to have a stable state of mind, and your emotions are focused on numbers rather than focused on fears. So, we've got this. We know that it can't be ignored. Let's take a look. First of all, what is an emotion? Let's get past the psychobabble and stuff like that. I tend to look at emotions as biological. I also tend to look at emotions from a neurobiological standpoint, and it really is helpful. The first thing is this definition I have of an emotion. It's the body, brain's, mind's triggering to any disruption to a familiar status. Okay? Now what does that look like? What that means is you have a standard sensorial pattern because you're just looking at setup, nothing's hot yet. And all of a sudden, it starts meeting criterion and you start looking for the entry point. Suddenly there's disruption to the familiar pattern. Suddenly right there an emotion is going to trigger, whether or not you like it or not. Okay? If you're not a person who has problems with entry points, then when you start getting into the trade and you're watching the trade and it's going along, and then those naughty little micro trends happen where it starts going against you, and all of a sudden you trigger, and there's your emotion, and it pops up, and there you are in fear all over again, or impulse. That's an emotion. It takes over mind. Okay? So here, how do we go about learning more about emotion? And my friends, this is one of the more powerful slides. If you're truly trying to learn how to manage your emotionality and state of mind, this takes a lot of the mystery out, and it gives you a lot of clues about the way to develop coping strategies and building strength. What are the components of an emotion? And particularly fear we're going to be talking about here. First is arousal. Arousal is the emotion revving up. It's triggered, and all of a sudden, like what you will be experiencing in arousal is that you'll start noticing your breath stop, or you start panting, you start breathing very lightly and heavily, only using the top 6 of your lungs. Then you're going to notice there's tenseness in the body. And then what you're going to notice is a certain fixation. It's very common for a person to become so fixated that everything else disappears. That is arousal. And for most traders that I work with, that is actually what I'm training them to observe. I'm training them to monitor the arousal component of an emotion, because by the time you get to the feeling component, which I'll talk about in a minute, it's too late. The chemistry of the emotion is already in your body and it's hijacked mind. The second element of an emotion, and actually probably the most important part, is what is the emotion telling you to do, the motivation. And fundamentally, an emotion is either going to say attack, avoid, or approach. And unfortunately, fear-based is going to avoid, impulse-based or anger is going to attack, and mindfulness states, calm states of mind, allows you to work with your neocortex and actually approach the trade from an impartial state of mind. So you can imagine right there that the whole key is in calming and working with emotion is first you got to disrupt and calm down the system, the biological system, to get a hold of mind. Then you started looking at you have to shift the motivation from attack or avoid to approach. No easy task. The third part of an emotion is the actual meaning that becomes embedded into your neural circuitry literally about the emotion, what it means about your adequacy, about your worth, about your mattering, about your power to be able to deal with stuff. We're going to be talking about that more also. The key is, meaning is there are assumptions that your brain entertains and works with, and ultimately they get wired into your brain as beliefs. And it is these beliefs that are actually doing your trading. This is powerful. This is incredibly powerful because fundamentally what trading is going to do, it's going to be a black and white litmus test of your beliefs about self and your efficacy of being able to work with uncertainty. That's what trading is going to do. And if you have effective beliefs, you will be a successful trader based on that you know how to trade. This is how you get the mindset. If you do not have effective beliefs, what you will do is you are on a bleed stage, and very happily the 95% of people, the 5% of people who actually know how to do this are going to happily take your capital. The fourth part of an emotion is feeling, and that's what everybody gets hung up on. And actually, feeling is probably one of the least important parts of an emotion. Feeling is the subjective experience you have of the emotion. You know, you might feel like if you're sad, you kind of have this shrink feeling. You know, if you're angry, you feel hot, you feel expanded. There's all sorts of feeling states. The problem with feeling is that the emotion as chemistry is already in your body and has already hijacked and contaminated your thinking. If you find yourself feeling in a trade, there's a good chance that there's any way to back out of it. That's what you need to do. You're too late. The chemistry is going to take about 15, 20 minutes to 45 minutes to burn and to get out before you can reestablish a baseline that allows you to trade successfully. Temperament is the actual predispositions that you're born with. That's the genetics. And I don't have anything to do with that. So, that's the part I don't deal with. But these are the four components. And when you're beginning to as you're going through this presentation and you're beginning to say, okay, let me connect the dots here. Let me see how I'm having problems with emotion. Okay, now I get this emotion business. It's not some feeling. Emotions is a disruption to a sensorial pattern. And what I'm doing is when it triggers, okay, now I can see the arousal. That's actually part of the emotion. I can see the motivation. That's what it's telling me to do. Okay. The meaning, okay, all of a sudden this sense of this whatever it means, this hesitation, what's behind that? You discover, oh my gosh, this is the route to be able to discover my self-limiting beliefs. So there you go. Now, to go further on this thing, what you're going to really have to do is you're going to have to do something that your biology and evolution hasn't done. You're going to have to separate uncertainty from fear. Because here's the formula, and this is the way it works, okay? Your brain was designed with this in mind. The truth is, life itself is highly uncertain. People who live in Western societies, like traders, we don't realize how uncertain life really is. You know, recently with the upswings and just the craziness that's occurred with our financial system, we've discovered uncertainty all over again. But the truth is, for most of the vast majority of people who live in the world, life itself is very uncertain. And they've learned to adapt with it. However, their brain is constantly trying to organize uncertainty into certainty, into security. And so the moment uncertainty shows up to the brain, it produces ambiguity. Ambiguity is going to produce confusion in the brain. Confusion produces, now this is a mammalian brain, this is the limbic system we're talking about here. This is the emotional brain. Confusion is equated with the fear of death. Unfortunately, the saber-toothed tigers that used to prey on us and generate this confusion no longer exist. Now it's in our psychology, and we can experience the same confusion, the same translation from confusion to fear by pulling the trigger or being in a trade. And from that confusion comes fear. And suddenly that fear is a powerful compulsion to get out of confusion and get back to certainty, which is a deadly thing because there is no certainty. It is the mindset you bring to uncertainty that matters. And then it will accept any explanation, however ineffective, that removes the confusion and moves back to the certainty of safety. And that's why people sit on the sidelines not trading when everything is matching up. It's not there. It produces confusion. It produces fear. It produces hesitation. Bang. That's the way it is. Now, from there, let's take this and let's actually look at it. Now let's put it one more, okay? Now let's say this becomes embedded into your neural circuitry. This becomes embedded into the self that you are. Suddenly what you're doing is you're trading out of your history. Because ultimately, what you're going to discover is that these assumptions that guide your ability to manage uncertainty comes down as self-fulfilling prophecies that you learn intergenerationally, and then you learn them all over again. And suddenly you have a history of managing uncertainty and fear. And then you start trading. You've been avoiding it, then you start trading. And suddenly what happens is, boom, those self-limiting beliefs that got wired into the emotion produces a psychological organization of self that is avoidant. Okay? And then out of that, you're either going to be a fear-based trader, and that's your historical pattern, to avoid threat. Okay? You run, you hide, you freeze, you submit. There are others who attack, and that's what we call the impulse traders. Okay? What happens is there's your revenge traders, those are over traders, those are the one who trade out of greed. And what you can see is all this is emotional based. It totally takes over mind, and suddenly you start thinking from the emotional state. That's the range of possibilities that you see and act in, not from a calm state of mind, which comes out of mindful trading, which is where we're going with this. And in approach, what happens is you become receptive, you become open to uncertainty, you begin to see possibility opening and closing, and you see probability. This is the powerful part. Now, here's the impact of emotions on trading, okay? The real key is that your whole brain, particularly your limbic system, is built around fear. That is the primal mother of emotion. That's the one that allowed us to survive over millions of years and develop into the beings we are. And until you master fear, fear will always block potential. Fear creates a comfort zone, a structure that allows you to act in what appears to be the illusion of certainty. And it keeps you there, and once you start trying to get out of it, it doesn't like it and it pulls you back in. And as a trader, fear truly has to be confronted to change the established pattern of reacting to an uncertain world. There's really no way around it, and you have to develop the skills for doing it, which we'll be talking about a little bit more. But one more. Let's really kind of tune this thing in to the brain and the mind on fear. Because I do not separate brain from mind. I think it's very dangerous to. I would say that the mind actually emerges from the brain. The brain is emotional in nature. The mind starts producing thought, and until you learn to manage the emotion, you do not control the kind of thought that arrives in mind. The key is, your brain is a negative assessment machine. It assumes harmful intent bias. If you don't believe this, think about the news. You know, when was there ever good news on the TV news show? They don't report good news. They report bad news. That's what attracts attention. We're drawn to it. Walk down a city block and just start noticing the conversations as you automatically judge and assess other people. Suddenly you have them pegged and stuff like that, and notice it's a negative. Then, add to this, your brain does not distinguish from uncertainty from fear. This is the big one, my friend. This is the one that if you want to become an accomplished trader, this is the piece that truly has to be changed. Because what happens, the brain's going to organize you to avoid uncertainty and fear and create this comfort zone. And that's what the problem is getting out of that comfort zone of your trading. It feels so certain, but it's an illusion. Then it forms self-fulfilling patterns based on the avoidance of fear and uncertainty. Does this start making sense to you guys? Then the patterns go on automatic, and they dominate your state of mind. And unfortunately, you start finding what you're not looking for. The brain doesn't understand not, okay? And then suddenly what happens is you develop this predisposition to trade from avoidance or greed rather than from calm authority. And if you get around people who are really good at trading, what you discover is they really don't trade from fear. They really don't trade from impulse. What happens is you'll just notice them in a very impartial state of mind, and they're just going through it. They're not thinking about losses. They're thinking about executing the trade right. So, now that we have an idea of biology, emotion, mind, and fear, let's actually look at the fears that dominate a trader's mind and that limit your access to the potential that also lives within you. These are the roadblocks, my friend, that stop you from moving into another level of trading. The first one is, guess what? The fear of uncertainty. You will experience that as hesitation. And by the way, folks, I would encourage you, as we're going through this, to really write down which one most resonates with you. You'll find several, but you will find one, maybe two, that really peg you, and you're able to identify, yes, this is the fear that I have. Naming the fear is the first step to conquering that fear. The fear of loss. These are the people who truly have a hard time pulling the trigger, and all of a sudden what you'll hear in their internal dialogue is this: what if? What if you lose? What if you lose? You already have seen the mind. You've already seen the way meaning is showing up as self-limiting beliefs, trying to get you to avoid risk. And of course, in trading, that's what you're managing. It's not right. Something's wrong. Then there's the fear of missing out, otherwise known as greed. And at one time, not too many years ago, human beings really weren't sure of their next meal. And when they had an opportunity to gain something, they better take it whole hog. They better consume everything. They better take everything on the plate. They didn't know where their next meal was going to come from. Unfortunately, that was a very good biological strategy. However, when we became psychological beings, it ran amok. It went totally different directions. There's also that fear-based urgency to make up for prior losses. This is called revenge trading. And you've got to make up. It's a fear of loss. Now I've got to make up. Now I've got to make up. Got to make up. And it is something that grips you, and literally it spins you, it puts you in the vortex, and then spits you out. And at the end of the day, you've then damaged your trading account. The fear of not being right, of actually making a mistake. Probably the largest perceptual map, the thing that has to change for most traders that get into it, is that they have a perfectionistic way of viewing the world. And unfortunately, part of that perfectionistic way of viewing the world is a fear of making mistakes. I have to be perfect. And ultimately what happens is in trading is not about certainty. It is not about being right a whole bunch of the time. It is being in a state of mind where you execute your trade well. That's what the zone is all about. You're no longer in fear of loss or winning. You're in just executing the trade. Very different. The fear of inadequacy, where you have to have external validation of the self to feel good about self. You'll see these guys in trading rooms, and they're whipping it up talking about how much money they're making, and you know as well as I do, the vast majority of traders are losing money. Okay? Self-sabotage. These are the folks who start putting good days, good weeks together, and then this creepy little thought starts emerging in there, and a little psychological demon saying it's getting too good, things are going to mess up, blah, blah, blah. And before you know it, you've blown up. You've blown up all the really good stuff you've done, and you started not paying attention to your trading plan again. The fear of success or failure. I want to focus here on fear of failure is really a lot about making mistakes. However, fear of success is the comfort zone. We come to a mindset about what value, what worth we are. And suddenly what happens is our net worth becomes equivalent to our self-worth. And a lot of people will put a figure on it. They might say $100,000, and suddenly once they hit that mark, they have a hard time going beyond that. They work for an entire month to hit that mark, and then what happens is that it just goes up and down, up and down. They've already fallen into that self-fulfilling pattern of limitation. Also, to me, the grandest one is the fear of growth and change. This is really allowing uncertainty to be present, recognizing that our job is to manage ambiguity. And our brain does not want to do that. It wants to stay into certainty. And until you kick that habit, until you learn to regulate the basic biological and psychological processes behind that, you stay stuck in this self-limiting patterns. Well, folks, now you understand these are the 9 roadblocks. And what I ask you to do is to really, truly take a look at them and decide which ones are your biggest problem. When you do this, it starts becoming easier, so at least you know what ballpark you're playing on. It's not happening out there. There's not a problem in the markets, okay? You have to take complete responsibility for your trading. The problem is the fear that drives your trading. It's not the markets. And my question here, what's the cost of fear-based mindset? Okay, what happens if you don't address this thing? What if you say, well, you know, this sounds really good. I'm just going to keep working, and I'm going to find it out there. I'm going to delay this. Yeah, I know I need to work with my mind, but you know something? I just don't want to go there. You know, what's the cost is? Estimates range between 80% to 95% of traders actually lose money. They blow up their accounts and they transfer their wealth, their capital, to 5% of people who are able to calm themselves and trade dispassionately and disciplined. That's just kind of the rules. So here it is. This is the way it works. The emotional state you're in, remember those 5 components, including meaning, including arousal, including motivation, including feeling, create the state of mind that you're in, your thinking. Your thinking creates a perceptual map. Is what you see as possible in the world. This is really big, okay? Out of that range of possibilities, that's what you take action in. This is your actual trading. Out of your trading becomes your reality. That's your profits and your losses. And then there's a feedback loop back to the emotional state. All of these areas are places where you need to start becoming observers of, because these are the places that you're going to have to learn how to manage. Otherwise, you stay in the same self-fulfilling pattern that you've been in that have created the problems. And I tell you what, nobody, we're not going to know who in the world anybody is, but I tell you what, just write in, Dolores is sitting here, and I'll announce a few of these as they come in. How much money has your psychology based on fear cost you? It's typical, a person who hasn't been trading long might have lost $4,000, $10,000. It's not unusual for people to have lost $50,000, $100,000, $200,000, a couple $1 million. And what I want you to do is get a clear picture of what the cost is of not attending and working with your psychology. So just write it in, and if not, we don't have to. While we're doing this, though, what I want to do is I want to turn to the next element. You know the problem now. How do you get out of it? Okay? The very first thing is you start becoming mindful. You start becoming mindful. To do this, you're going to have to learn how to produce emotional regulation of emotion. You would have to learn how to breathe, because every emotional state has a biological breathing signature attached to it. Your anger, your fear cannot exist if you're doing diaphragmatic breathing. It is required to either not breathe or to breathe only in a panicky way in order to fuel that. So the thing is, once you calm your body down, and that's with breathing relaxation, next comes mindfulness. Mindfulness is an ability of kind of stepping back and beginning to observe your thoughts, not as who you are. You and your thoughts are not the same. This is the biggest thing that happens. Okay? And let's explore this a little deeper. Within the mind, what you will notice is that there is an internal dialogue going on at all times. You'll hear it. And those of you who do not know the internal dialogue, sit there. Trading is so cool, is that it's a very solitary type of endeavor. And when you're looking for entry points, it's just you, it's just your screen, and it's just your thoughts. You are truly alone with your thoughts. And suddenly what you notice is there's a dialogue going on there. What if you're wrong? What if it says, oh, get in. Another part says, no, what if you're wrong? What if you're another part just starts really fear. What if I am wrong? What if I'm no good? That's the internal dialogue. And if you ignore the internal dialogue, a good trading plan is wasted. And this internal dialogue, no one escapes it. No one escapes it. In fact, the internal dialogue, and if you're going to write something down, this is it, gives voice to the belief system that you're trading from. And if it's fear-based, it gives voice to the self-limiting beliefs that you're trading from. This is powerful, friends. It is an incredible tool if you choose to develop it. Learning to manage the fear-based internal dialogue is fundamental to success. It's not going to go away on its own. There is no clicking your heels and wishing you're back in Kansas. There is no Dorothy. What happens is this is the real hard work of being able to build a mindset. Then managing and expanding the internal dialogue is the essence of a strong psychological trading plan. When you begin to see this, you begin to go, well, let me see, if everything is really based on this sense of self-limiting belief that I bring into trading, what are those self-limiting beliefs? I'm going to give you 4 that in working with traders, these are the 4 that just resonate so deeply. When you look at performance, okay, and you're saying what belief system is behind that performance. Now, if you are just kicking butt and you're having great trades, this won't apply to you. But if you're having problems in your trading, this will apply to you. The first is a sense of inadequacy. I'm never good enough. I'm not smart enough. I just can't make mistakes. Mistakes are proof of my inadequacy. A sense of not mattering. I only matter based on what I do, not who I am. And you'll find this as self-loathing or arrogance. Now remember, these are self-limiting beliefs that you need exposed if you're going to do anything about them. And these are the very ones you're going to try to avoid at all costs. Then a sense of not being worthy. I have to prove myself by performance to have value. And then powerlessness. Nothing I do seems to make a difference. I'm doomed, victimhood. Or I'm become a huge person and I'm going to revenge trade to prove how powerful I am. If you notice, these are all reactions to these 4 primary self-limiting beliefs. All of us, if you're human, these are what's going to guide you. Now, how do they actually show up? How do they actually show up in your internal dialogue inside the mind? Well, first of all, conceive of the mind as a trading committee, not as some singular unit where there's just you and your thoughts. Conceive that your thoughts represent different elements of the self. Some are destructive, some are constructive, and there's a battle going on. And let's take a look at this battle. The first element of self that you really truly need to know about is the inner critic. The inner critic is that part of you that says, what if? What if you're wrong? What if you're wrong? You're no good. You're pretty dang stupid. Look how stupid you were to make a mistake like that. Can't you get it right? It's the one that judges you. It's the voice that criticizes you. It's the one that you never measure up. You're never good enough. Or it's the one that tempts you. Get into that trade. It may not be on your trading plan, but man, look how good it looks. Get into that one. Get into that one. And anybody who has been around trading long enough knows that what happens is it is immensely important to be very disciplined in trading. If it's not in your trading plan, you don't trade, no matter how tempting it is. This is the inner critic. This is the inner critic. All of us have one. It's inescapable, and if you try to ignore it, you give it carte blanche to your mind. The next element is the adapted self, or what would be called the wounded child. Okay? These are adaptations to this fear-based mongering that goes on, and here they are. Some people have assumed the role of the doubter. I can't win. I call it actually victim. Then Chicken Little, that's the one that has negative appraisal of everything. That's the one who does all the hesitation. It's always half empty. The glass is always half empty. The gambler, don't leave any money on the table. This is greed. Even though there's your target, the thing is you're making a reasonable profit. No, you got to let the thing run to grab all the gusto, and all of a sudden it crashes on you. The perfectionist, I have to win every time to prove I'm okay. I have to win all the time. The entitled one, I deserve to win. The con, this is self-deception. This is when you're lying to yourself, and you're not acknowledging that it's you that is the problem. It's not out there. It's finally recognizing, I can see that I'm the one who has the problem. It's not the markets. The markets really just don't care. They don't know I'm there. They don't care that I'm there. And it's me who comes to them, and I'm making a story about how the markets don't like me. The fraud. This is when you're pretending to look good, and you know that you're not. The orphan. If you have ever experienced fear in trading, you have experienced the orphan. All these distinctions that we're using are manifestations of the orphan. The orphan is a Jungian archetype, and it's the part that gets separated from its need from cherishment and connection, and it's trying to prove itself to survive. The saboteur, that's the part of you that keeps blowing things up. If you find yourself putting some stuff together and then blowing yourself up, you will know the saboteur. The alpha, this is very, very common in corporate American, where they've been downsized. They're in their late 40s, 50s, and 60s, and they've got children. They've got a spouse, and they have a livelihood. And the guy says, "Well, hey, man, I'm an executive. I can go in. I can do this." And they have a whole thing of winning and having other people submit and taking from markets. And unfortunately, that's just not the way to approach. Approaching markets is developing an attitude of what is the market going to give me. These are, you're born into this circumstance and these self-limiting beliefs, but there is no reason to stay stuck. If I'm you, I'm writing down which one of these parts of me are doing my trading. It will help you out immensely. They are not you. These are elements of self that you've been asleep at the wheel and they've taken over. Now what I want to do is have a few parallels between biology of brain and psychology of mind here. The biology of fear, that's your limbic system. That's your avoidance of threat. This is what in Jungian work is called orphan. The brain is a negative assessment machine. This is your inner critic. It's going to find every reason for you not to get out of the zone of comfort into uncertainty, because it wants certainty, and it will allow you to be less than you could be. The adaptation of your fear response to environmental stressors, that's equal to your negative appraisal and your management of uncertainty. The truth is trading and life is uncertain. It is the mindset that you bring to it that matters. So here we go. Now, what I ask you to do is to imagine the mind is not singular. I ask you to imagine that the mind actually is incredibly complex, and that there are forces within mind that we have ignored, and we ignored at our own peril. Because ultimately, if you begin to look at mind as a committee, a trading committee, more like a boardroom, and what happens is there's a power struggle going on within that committee to see what direction the company, you, are going to go. Unfortunately, because you don't want to accept how complex the mind can be and how it can have different elements within itself, ultimately, you've been asleep at the wheel. You start waking up and you realize that there are truly destructive parts of the self you better know about and build skills and tools to resist. Then you also find constructive parts of the self that truly produce great trading. The key is The internal dialogue controls the story you create about trading. Being mindless to the voices in this inner committee in the self leads to fear-based or impulse-based thinking, and actually called mindlessness. Disrupting this grip of fear opens you to the potential living within you. And my friends, as a human being, you are the animal that's endowed with the ability to reinvent the conversation of the self. This is so powerful, reinventing the conversations within the mind. Because ultimately, the third stage of this thing is being able to develop the mind to become a successful trader. You begin to awaken, as Carl Jung would say, in the concept of journey into life, is what you do is you learn to awaken the heroes living within the self, not just the self-limitations that have guided your life so far. So ultimately, when you begin to look at this, let's take it the way what long-term change actually looks like. The first stage, always, is emotional regulation. You have to get your body so that you can manage it, because if you don't do that, you will never get to emotional regulation. If you don't get to emotional regulation, you're never going to get to mindfulness. That's that sense of being able to step back and to observe and to witness thoughts in your mind and recognize you and your thoughts are not the same. Thoughts arise, they bubble up into awareness, they have a life, and then they go away. What happens is when you're mindless, you become absorbed into that thought and it takes you into a future. In mindfulness, you learn to decide what future you're going to go into. In the stage 3, you begin to disrupt the internal dialogue. It's no longer just sitting there in the background messing you up. It's no longer creating the circumstance of your life out of consciousness. You are very aware of it and you understand the elements. In the 4th stage, you begin to develop the peak performance elements of self. That which we call ruler, that which we call warrior, that which we call sage, that which we call caregiver. Out of this comes the reorganization of the mind. And suddenly what happens, you still have internal dialogue, you're human, you're going to have internal dialogue. But it becomes richer. It's no longer dominated by the inner critic's judgment. It's no longer dominated by the fear of the orphan, but suddenly the discipline, the impartiality, the nurture of self, and the courage to act become dominant players in the committee of the self. So, when you do this, here's what you discover. Is you discover very rapidly that most psychological systems change surface material for short-term gains. The truth is self-limiting beliefs are hardwired into neural circuitry. You have to change the circuitry. Part of that is through compassion. The core material that triggers our primitive patterns of fear have to be addressed for long-term reorganization of the self. There is no affirmation that we're just going to affirm this, we're going to affirm this. We're just not going to look into a mirror and say, I'm a good person, I'm a good man, I'm a worthy person, I'm a great human being, I'm a great trader. There will always be an element of the self going back and go, oh yeah, and you'll see that stuff, it sells and sells and sells, but the thing is you have to confront the internal demons in order to release the prisoners that have been kept. It is those prisoners who become the power, the potential of what you can be. So, compassion is the emotion that reorganizes self for internal validation rather than all that external validation stuff that we were looking for. This is where it's actually at. And by the way, in terms of compassion, has anybody in here ever found that beating yourself up yet again has produced positive results in your trading? No. The truth is, compassion has been demonstrated to modulate the amygdala, which is part of that's the fear response zone in the limbic system, and that is how you change meaning. So, here, my friends, is the truth. Is that trading is life on steroids. The truth is there has always been an internal struggle. Most of us have avoided it like the plague in other endeavors. When we get into trading, it is unavoidable. It stalks us. The truth is you have to develop a warrior. That's the courage to set boundaries. It's the motivation to confront the critical nature of your negative assessments from a position of strength. You have to be able to develop a ruler. That's the discipline. That's the discipline. That's just not cracking. That's the one saying, no, this is the organization of this committee that's going to be here. The inner critic's not going to be here. The woundedness and the fear is not going to be here. we're going to have impartiality. That is the ruler. Impartiality is what in Jungian work is called sage. And impartiality is the emotional state that you want to trade from. It cannot be contaminated by fear or you lose it. Nurture, you have to take care of yourself. You have to have self-compassion rather than beating up. You have to change the core belief of discovering your deeper worth. And that's done through compassion. So, how do you put it all together? The first thing is you move from mindlessness to mindfulness. All this stuff starts going, whoa, I had no idea all this stuff is going on within me. Yep, this is what's going on. If you're human, and if you're trading, and if you're in conflict, this is the stuff going on. Then, emotional regulation of fear and impulse have to occur. You don't get to mindfulness until you get control of the emotion and not having it hijack your thinking. Then, you locate the internal dialogue that constricts possibility and keeps you stuck in self-limiting belief. That's the quintessential thing of where you have emotional regulation and mindfulness working together so that you can observe this hidden conversation. And all of a sudden you're realizing, my God, this has been running rampant in my mind for all my life, and trading has exposed it. Yes. Then you start developing the compassionate warrior, the discipline, the courage, the impartiality, and the patience to be able to build a mindset built for probability thinking. Then you begin to manage the internal conflict while trading. And what you do is you realize that you can trade from a calm, disciplined state of mind. Now, what does this actually look like? Well, let's parallel these, okay? An undisciplined mind's on the left. It's a fear, impulse-based mindset. You have an inner critic, and you have an orphan doing your trading. You start out impartial, and then you get into the thick of the battle, and suddenly that's wiped out, and you're in fear again. That's called mindless trading, and you are blind to the power of the internal dialogue. You stay totally unaware of your other potentials, and the inner critic is the source of your self-limiting beliefs, and you continue reacting from the adapted voice. That is just the historical internal dialogue, and that's where most people stay. Or you step into it and start developing this stuff, and suddenly you start getting emotional regulation, and you have a calm, focused mind. Then mindfulness. You begin to control the internal dialogue. And out of it, what you do is in this last box, you suddenly have this discipline that reigns over this committee. And suddenly there's a warrior that has courage, that confronts the inner critic, that pulls the trigger. You have a sage that has impartiality and actually trades numbers according to plan rather than emotion. You have patience. You're no longer being torn apart at the seams, and your passion for trading comes alive. This is the way it works, my friends. This is the way it works. And ultimately, what you do is you move from fear-based to probability-based states of mind. Over there in the fear, what happens is fear and worry dominate mind. In a probability-based mindset, there is concern and vigilance. This is the whole point. Now, the key is, this is very possible. This is very, very possible, my friends. And ultimately, what I ask you is, go to your trading today, tomorrow, and start noticing the truth of what we've been talking about here. Start noticing how your emotions play and become physical. Start noticing how the thoughts are. Start noticing that these thoughts have a life of their own, and notice there's more. And my question is, I hope you have really learned a lot about the brain, emotion, and mind. I hope you have learned about fear and the voice of your fear. And I encourage you to go to my website. It's down there listed. There's lots of free stuff, lots of articles, lots of interviews. There's also other stuff, obviously. And what I'm really, really interested in, for those of you guys who are truly understand that you need to be able to master the inner game, the internal dialogue, and you know this is the thing that stops you and you're ready to go, I encourage you to sign up for a free consult with me. You go to the website, you hit Contact Us, and you follow the directions, and you're there. If there's any questions, we've got We got two questions. Do you use any biofeedback technologies in your work? Emotion is so subjective. I have in the past. Back when I was working with violent criminals and things like that, I used biofeedback. I find it cumbersome, and most people, again, what I do is I teach people to monitor their arousal, which is what biofeedback's doing, and it is so obvious, and you need to produce that awareness rather than having a second-order technology to be able to teach you. But you have to develop. You become the biofeedback engineer. Would you say being an optimist versus a pessimist is the answer? Actually, I don't think either are. What happens is when you're in a trader's state of mind, it's not about winning or losing. It is about observing and being very neutral, about being very calm, very disciplined, and taking what the market is willing to give you. Optimism, I'm a learned optimist. At the same time, what happens is that I like having a detached state of mind that allows me to be able to see my optimism. Optimism become a liability in trading. You start having a bunch of things going good and saying, hey man, I'm getting excited, this is really cool. And what happens is you're no longer in that disciplined, impartial, courageous, and patient state of mind that's required to trade. Pessimism has no place in trading. What has a place in trading is discipline, courageousness, patience, and impartiality. When you finish trading, you can become an optimist, you can become a pessimist, but while you trade, there is only one state of mind, win or lose, that's there. That's it. Friends, I have thoroughly enjoyed myself, and I hope that your journey into trading is prosperous. And if I may help you in this journey to help you learn how to manage mind and create a mind built for trading, I would love to be able to help you. Until that time, I thank you, and again, I thank Vicki and Maud. This is a great company. They do great services. And without anything else, I'll see you next time, and we will keep exploring, and we'll find out how to build a mind that trades successfully. Thank you very much.